procedures. The development at the National Assembly has to be debated by the population. National Assembly members are embodiments of the powers of the people of the Gambia, the sovereign people of the Gambia. The issue at hand is a new constitution for the Gambia. I am a part and parcel of those who are the architects of a manifesto supported by a coalition. And in that manifesto, it is expressed that a third republic should be founded by the coalition when it assumes the reign of the state. The executive is now in the hands of the person supported by the coalition. And the expectation is that Gambia will have a new constitution after criticism that the 1997 constitution needed to be reinvented so that it will move the country to another level. It is common sense that you cannot have a third republic without the constitution of a third republic. The primary objective of the new National Assembly in 2017 should have been the founding of the supreme law of the land. Practice, conduct must be based on law. Otherwise, you cannot have the rule of law. And when it became a major agenda, I was among the first who said that we were not in the process of overthrowing a government. We had undergone a democratic change to the ballot box, and we were undergoing the process of consolidating democracy, and a third republic must be born. In doing that, you cannot simply take the 1997 constitution and drop it in the ocean. I told them that the constitution was a living document, and it has said how it should be changed. And nobody can disregard that without overthrowing it. The records are there. But the overwhelming majority of parliamentarians agreed that we should establish a constitutional review commission. And the commission will be charged with the responsibility of providing a draft constitution, a new constitution, that would have to be promulgated. But how, was my question. Because at that material time, I could only see two options in amending the 1997 constitution. A process where the National Assembly members will receive a bill, consider it, pass it, and send it to the president for his assent. And that has happened when Parliament decided to change the 65 years limit to the term of being qualified to be a presidential candidate. It was published in the Gazette, brought to the Assembly, passed, taken to the President for his assent, and it is now a constitutional provision without a referendum. But the Constitution said, under Section 226, subsection 4 and 7, that there are provisions of the Constitution which were entrenched clauses that could not be changed without a referendum. I said that if we wanted a very speedy process, we should review the 1997 Constitution. All those provisions which could be changed without a referendum will be put as a bill, brought to the National Assembly, passed, assented to by the President, and automatically those provisions will be changed. Then those provisions that required a referendum will be put together, then we go into a referendum. That within a year, we could have changed the Constitution. But no, the intention was there to come up with something new. Just like the 1970 Constitution was put in the dustbin, well, the opinion was that the 1997 Constitution could also suffer the same fate so that we come up with a new Constitution. Who will oppose that? What is essential is to have a third republic with the Constitution of the Third Republic. But what was the agenda? The agenda was to come up with a totally new constitution and promulgate it. We followed through. The HCRC was mandated to consult, it has done that. To publish the constitution, it has done that. To give it to the president, it has done that. To be published in the Gazette, that has been done. To publish its report, that has been done. And eventually, a Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia, 2020 Promulgation Bill 2020, was brought to the National Assembly in September 2020 for the promulgation process to start. That required its submission, first reading, second reading to debate the merit. But as the nation witnessed, we debated content rather than merit. The clauses, the details are supposed to be reviewed at the committee stage, clause by clause. And subject matter specialists, interested parties, all could be invited so that they'll be able to express their opinions on the Constitution. The debate was, could the National Assembly touch it or it couldn't? Of course, the National Assembly can review and make amendments to bills, but it could have been an agreement of not touching it or touching it. That's a debate of itself. What is best for the nation? The national interest should have been supreme. That debate was amputated because the Constitution required that we cannot move with a bill unless at the second reading you have the support of 3/4 of all the members of the National Assembly. The majority supported the second reading, but the minority opposed the second reading. And we could not get 3/4 majority, and that is why the constitutional process was blocked. At the adjournment debate, I raised the question, answered by Her Excellency the Vice President and the Minister of Justice. Is the government still committed to the founding of a third republic. And how could that be done without the republic, the constitution of a third republic? They said that they will go back and cabinet will consult. Eventually, it was declared that yes, they would want to engage in a process of consultation. I must say, since we left the National Assembly, the party that I belong to and the National Assembly members it has had never been contacted by anybody. Until recently, we were told that we should go to the International Conference Center. International delegations are there and coming to talk to political parties to see how they can resolve a problem. What problem? The majority supported the second reading so that it can go to the committee stage for a review. The minority opposed that. Where is the crisis? So as far as we are concerned, we are on board. It is better to go and consult those who are not on board. And we are on board in this sense that we are ready also for dialogue. And the dialogue could have gone at the level of the committee stage. Now, looking at the current sitting, this is the fourth ordinary session of the current legislative year. That's the end of this legislative year. And since we have come to the end of the legislative year, I saw the urgency of introducing a motion so that we can rescind the decision we made in September. And if we do, we reverse the process to 22nd December, where the bill will be there for further consideration. And I will read exactly the motion I intended to table for history to judge. And allow me to do that so that you will get the content and then decide what would have been best for the nation. But before doing that, it is good to summarize the process. Why did I introduce a motion to seek leave from the Speaker on the basis of urgency? It is simple. At the level of the National Assembly, if you want any matter to be discussed by the Assembly, you must introduce a motion. There are two types of motions. Motions to be introduced with notice on a section, Standing Order 52, where you have 5 clear days to submit your motion to the table office, and they will consider it, and the motion may be declared inadmissible, and it will be returned to you. That is one phase. Another phase is to introduce a motion without notice. And I sought leave from the Speaker to allow me to introduce a motion so that the National Assembly will vote on rescinding the decisions we made so that we start the process anew from there, from where we left it. Not anew, but we start the process from where we left it. That was the purpose of my motion. It is important for people to understand why that was done. It's because Standing Order 29.3 has created provision where a matter that has already been decided at the level of the National Assembly cannot be discussed again until you rescind that particular decision. But for 29.3, it gives authority that you can only do that by ensuring that a notice is given for the rescinding of a motion that is done within a particular session, during a particular session. That's what it says. So it has not given any authority to decide on a motion that had taken place during another session, at a preceding session, in a successive session. It does not have that. And if you are to introduce a motion, you must quote a standing order. And there was no such standing order. And this is where the creativity of parliamentary democracy is all about. This is where discretion comes. This is where precedence comes, both at the level of the courts and at the level of parliament. So I thought that I was being creative by relying on Standing Order 8. And Standing Order 8 is simply emphasizing the creativity, and I'll show you the creativity that could have been injected in the process. It actually states that the Speaker of the National Assembly is the authority that should be able to decide on such matters. And how does it put it? Listen very carefully to its words. It says, in all cases, no exception, where matters are not expressly provided by these standing orders, any question or procedure or order shall be decided by the Speaker. There was no provision that shows that you can make a motion to rescind a decision of another session. It is not in our standing orders. But our standing orders say, if something is not expressly stated, and that is the reality with the motion that I wanted to make, then the Speaker has full authority to decide. And that is precisely why I made a motion for the Speaker to decide. And we will examine the decision. And I will summarize it. So essentially, that was the purpose for introducing my motion. And why did I introduce it? Since we have power to rescind a decision during a session, now we wanted to create a precedent that will also enable us to rescind a decision of another session. That's all I was seeking from the Speaker and from the National Assembly members. And why was that necessary? Because they are talking about the constitution building process. They've even invited an international delegation to do what? What mediation? This is about a bill to be brought to the National Assembly, to be decided by 3/4 majority before we can proceed to the next stage and even to a referendum. That is a parliamentary matter. You needed a consultation between the executive and parliament to resolve this matter. Now, when I introduced that motion, the Speaker's ruling is that I have not proven urgency. That is one. But what is more fundamental to me is that at the end of the ruling, the Speaker strayed into a matter that is purely for the judiciary and not for Parliament. The Speaker indicated that this matter, the Constitution having been blocked, is now dead. But what is funny, a constitution that is dead, the speaker is saying that it can be reintroduced. Something that is dead, you will breathe life to it and introduce it again by cabinet or by members of the National Assembly. This is the second coming of a constitution. Where in the constitution has it said under section 101 or standing order 62 where it says that a bill may be introduced by the president, vice president, or a member, or a minister, or a member of the National Assembly? May be introduced. There is no statement talking about reintroduction. Wherever you reintroduce something, then that is not dead. And this is where their flaw lies in interpretation. Because what is dead cannot be reintroduced. It is dead. And that's what I recognize. That by our decision in September, they killed the Constitution. And since it is dead, if you want to bring another bill that deals with a constitution, you must go through the same process as determined by section 226 of the Constitution. It means that that bill must be published in the Gazette for 3 months in the first instance, and a second publication for not less than 10 days before its introduction into the National Assembly. When is that going to happen? They say there is no urgency in what I was saying. But then, if with all the advices of the executive, international, everywhere, there is nothing they can do except 2 things. What I said, which they have rejected so far, and to introduce another bill of the Constitution of the Republic of Gambia, promulgation bill. And it will take that process before it is introduced. And if it is introduced, where is the guarantee that you will have the 3/4 majority for it to continue? And it must continue up to the 3rd stage before it is handed over to the IEC for a referendum. When will that referendum happen? This is what I saw. That therefore, we must rescue the process. And to be able to rescue the process, Parliament has the powers to rescue the process if we had the will, the political will to do so. That is why that was introduced, that the route of the executive is going to be a long one and also unpredictable. But the route of the legislature had already been taken. We know the disagreements. If we rescinded on our decision, then we go back to the negotiation right there in Parliament. Some were misconceived, some opinions were misconceived. They will be clarified. The properly conceived one will be considered and will be creative, because ultimately, whatever contradiction that exists, it is the judiciary that must solve it. And everybody is on board that we need a constitution of a 3rd republic, even in a form that may be amended here and there to suit all of us. What is not disagreeable to all of us can always be amended. So that was my consideration. That is why I introduced the motion. The second leg of talking about reintroduction that has no basis in law, but the issue of urgency has a base in the standing orders, because it is the discretion of the speaker that matters in that sense. I must say, where something is expressly stated in law, there is no basis of discretion. Where something is expressly stated in the standing orders, there is no basis of discretion. But what is not made impermissible by law, impermissible by the standing orders, the basis of discretion is there. And Standing Order 8, in fact, asserts that, and I quoted it. So it's purely within the discretion of the Speaker to have granted me leave. Admissibility under our standing orders must be properly situated. It has 5 bases of making a particular motion inadmissible. When the motion must infringe the standing orders, number 1. Number 2, it must infringe the Constitution. Number 3, it must be so long that nobody can follow it. Number 4, it must affront the dignity of the National Assembly. And number 5, it must be something that makes allegation that cannot be substantiated. Clearly, those 5 bases. Look at the motion I made. You cannot say that it infringed on the Constitution, nor that it was long, nor that it affronts the dignity of the National Assembly. You cannot also say that it was something that stated something that could not be substantiated. So there is no basis of rejecting the admissibility of the statement except on the discretion of the Speaker that this was not an urgent matter requiring for him to allow the motion to be passed. Well, there's a difference in opinion. And I reserve the right to my opinion, he reserves the right to his opinion, and the public will judge, posterity will judge. I am convinced that constitution building is a matter of urgency. And the blockage we face, and the fact that the executive could only take a long route, which is uncertain, unpredictable, makes my motion urgent, because we already had a motion that took a given form for the bill to reach a given stage. If we rescinded our decision, it means that we know exactly the problems we are dealing with, and those known problems could have been easily addressed. That was the basis of my motion. I would not want to continue to bore you with other issues, but if you allow me, I will put in the public space precisely what I intended to submit to the National Assembly members for their decision. And allow me to read it for your sake and for posterity. It is a motion to rescind National Assembly decision not to support the second reading of the Constitution of the Gambia, Promulgation Bill 2020, on the basis of 3/4 majority required by Section 226 of the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia. Having regard to Standing Order 8 of the Standing Orders, which states, in all cases where matters are not expressly provided for by the standing orders, any questions on procedure or order shall be decided by the Speaker. Having regard to paragraph 2, which adds, the decision made in paragraph 1 shall be based on the Constitution, statute law, the precedents, customs, procedures, traditions, and practices of the Assembly. And D, the precedents, customs, procedures, traditions, and practices of other jurisdictions to the extent that they are applicable in the Assembly. Having regard to Section 101 subsection 1 of the Constitution, which states, subject to the provisions of this section, a bill or motion may be introduced in the National Assembly by a member of the Cabinet or by a member of the National Assembly, and the National Assembly shall give consideration to the bills and motions so introduced. Shall give consideration, underline the word. When a bill is introduced into the National Assembly, it may be allocated, having regard to subsection 5 of section 101 of the 1997 Constitution, which adds, when a bill is introduced into the National Assembly, it may be allocated to an appropriate committee for examination, and a report made thereon to the National Assembly. This is the Constitution talking. We'll send bills to committees. Having regard to Standing Order 62, paragraph 8, which states, the provision in Standing Order 62 to 79 shall apply to government bills, committee bills, and members' bills, unless otherwise provided for herein. Having regard to the fact that the consideration and committee stage of the bill are stipulated in section 101, subsection 1 and 5 of the 1997 Constitution, are clearly stipulated and sequenced under Standing Order 65 and 66 as follows. Standing Order 65. A bill shall be introduced by the person in charge of the bill by handing a copy of it to the clerk, and shall read about the short title, who shall read about the short title, whereupon the bill shall be deemed to have been read a first time. Order 66, paragraph 1 states, following the first reading, the stages in the Assembly's consideration of the bill shall be. What does shall be mean? Shall be second reading, a general debate on the bill with an opportunity for all members to vote on the general principles. Vote on the general principles, not the detail. And that's the second reading. Committee stage. Detailed investigation by a committee followed by a report to the Assembly. A bill may be committed to a select, standing, or special select committee, or to a committee of the whole Assembly. D. Consideration stage. Consideration of an opportunity for members to vote on the detailed clauses of the bill, including amendments to the bill. Consideration stage is taken by the Assembly. Third reading, passing or rejection of the bill without further amendment. So you could go through all this process, and at the third reading, you may decide something else. But let me continue with my reading. Having regard to section 226 of the Constitution, which provides for a second and third reading of a bill aimed at altering the Constitution. Having regard to subsection 9 of section 26 of the 1997 Constitution, which states, in this section, references to the Constitution include references to any law that amends or replaces any of the provisions of this Constitution. B. References to the alteration of this Constitution include references to the amendment, modification, reenactment with or without amendment or modification of the Constitution or of any provision for the time being contained in this Constitution, the suspension or repeal or the making of different provision in lieu thereof, and the addition of new provisions to this Constitution. Having regard to section 226, subsection 2, 3, 4, which stipulates how the Constitution could be altered either by a bill passed by the National Assembly and assented to by the President after being supported on the second and third reading by the votes of not less than 3/4 of the members of the National Assembly, or through a referendum before passing of the bill and the presentation to the President for his or her assent in case of amendments of specific provisions of the Constitution. Having regard to Section 226, subsection 4 and 7, which restrict the power of the National Assembly to pass a bill altering the following provisions unless the bill is subjected to a referendum. Subsection 4 applies to this section, meaning Section 226, my input there, Sections 1 and 79, subsection 2, which relate to the sovereignty of the Gambia, Section 451 and 62, which relates to the Constitution as the supreme law of the Gambia, Section 813.4, which relates to citizenship, Chapter 4, which provides for the protection of fundamental rights and freedom, Section 39, 142, 147, which relates to elections and the Independent Electoral Commission, Section 63.1 and the fourth sentence of Section 71.2, which relate to the term of the President and the qualifications for ministers, Section 85.4 and 167, which relate to the Director of Public Prosecutions and the independence of the Auditor General, Section 87 and 100, which relate to the National Assembly and the legislative power, Section 121 and 2A, 2 and 13, 121, 1, 123, 126, 2, 128, 130, 132, 133, 135, and 136, 138, 1 and 4, which relate to the judicature, the judiciary, Section 149, 1 and 151, 1, which relates to taxation and the withdrawal of money from public funds, and Section 193, 1, which relates to local government. Having regard to Section 193, 226, subsection 2 and 3 of the Constitution, which permits the amendment of all other provisions not mentioned under subsection 7 without a referendum. Having regard that the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia 2020 Promulgation Bill 2020 sought to repeal every provision of the 1997 Constitution in its entirety to a referendum by relying solely on Section 226 of the Constitution, which does not provide for such holistic alteration of all the provisions of the Constitution to a referendum. Having regard to Section 102 of the 1997 Constitution, which indicates, in addition to the other powers conferred on the National Assembly, this Constitution or any other law, the National Assembly shall have power to include in a bill a proposal for a referendum on an issue of national concern defined in the bill. Having regard to Section 100 of the Constitution, which states the legislative power of the Gambia shall be exercised by bill passed by the National Assembly and assented to by the President. Whereas the National Assembly has all the powers to alter or facilitate the altering, repealing of the Constitution and the promulgation of a Constitution in lieu of the 1997 Constitution by relying on Section 102 and Section 226 of the Constitution and stating new precedents and setting new precedents. Whereas the Constitutional Review Commission Act 2017 is an act enacted by the National Assembly and the President to provide the establishment of a Constitutional Review Commission to draft and guide the process of promulgating a new constitution for the Gambia and for connected matters. Whereas Section 21 of the Act orders that the Commission shall, upon completion of its work, submit a constitution, propose new constitution, and a report thereon in originals to the President. Whereas upon the submission of the draft constitution and report to the President, the Commission has published the proposed constitution and report as provided for under Section 21, subsection 2 of the Constitutional Review Commission Act. Whereas such a proposed new constitution cannot be promulgated without the laying of a bill before the National Assembly aimed at altering all the provisions of the 1997 Constitution by way of a holistic repeal and enacting the clauses of the proposed new constitution by way of holistic promulgation. Whereas the Minister of Justice had introduced the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia 2020 Promulgation Bill 2020 for the first reading before the National Assembly, whereas the Minister of Justice did move a motion for the second reading of the bill on 22nd September 2020, followed by a debate on the general merits and principles by the National Assembly members, whereas any of the provisions of the Constitution could be amended and new provisions added in the 1997 Constitution, either by passing a Constitution Amendment Bill for assent by the President or by approving a Constitution Amendment Bill for referral to the Independent Electoral Commission for a referendum, whichever provision is applicable under the terms and conditions set under Section 226 of the 1997 Constitution, whereas the National Assembly has the sole power to consider any bill to alter the 1997 Constitution in its entirety by remitting it to a committee which is embodied with power to take evidence, scrutinize details, and recommend amendments before the consideration of a bill, clause by clause, by the Assembly at its start reading. Whereas Section 102 and Section 108 of the Constitution have given powers to the National Assembly to rely on its committees and standing orders to provide remedy to any constitutional vacuum in the exercise of its lawmaking powers. Whereas Section 226 of the Constitution provides for the approval on the second and third reading before any alteration of the Constitution could take place with or without a referendum. Whereas Standing Order 68 provides for a bill to be referred to the Assembly Business Committee for committal to a relevant committee, including Committee of the Whole Assembly, for detailed scrutiny if the motion on the second reading is carried. Whereas on the 22nd of September 2020, the motion for the second reading of the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia 2020 Promulgation Bill 2020 was not supported by the 3/4 majority required by the Constitution for the bill to proceed to the committee stage. Whereas Section 22 of the Constitutional Review Commission Act 2017 aimed to transform the members of the Commission into subject matter specialists who would be obliged to attend committee meetings of the Assembly to clarify any matter and answer any question relating to the clauses of the proposed new Constitution. Whereas an impasse has been created in the constitutional reform process by the 22nd September 2020 decision of the National Assembly. Whereas such impasse could be rolled back by rescinding the decision taken by the National Assembly on 22nd September 2020 to reject the motion for the second reading, in the spirit of unlocking the potential in all National Assembly members to rise up to any occasion aimed at upholding and defending the viability and integrity of the Assembly and the supreme interests of the Gambia, our homeland, I move with all the solemnity and humility I could muster that this August National Assembly rescinds its decision of 22nd September 2020 to reject the second reading of the bill entitled the Constitution of the Republic of Gambia Promulgation Bill 2020. I further move as follows, that upon rescinding its decision, the Assembly prevails on the Minister of Justice to withdraw the bill or the motion for the second reading in order to review the provision of the Constitution and the processes under which the standing orders and the processes under the standing orders that are applicable in facilitating the promulgation of new Constitution and the repealing of the one in force in full consideration with the National Assembly and in full consultation also with the National Assembly. that, and B, that the Assembly Business Committee be charged with the responsibility of assigning the relevant committee with the task of reviewing Section 22 of the Constitutional Review Commission Act in order to prescribe the role of the Constitutional Review Commission during the committee stage of the National Assembly aimed at reviewing the schedule of the bill embodying the proposed new constitution. That the Assembly convenes